Good morning, everybody. It is Friday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Post-Gazette, here with Matt Vensel, our Penguins beat reporter, for a breaking news, but also a long time coming news video on the hiring by the Penguins of Kyle Dubas. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. I thought we'd be doing this about 2 weeks ago, but here we are. They finally hired someone. It only took them 49 days, but they feel they got their guy.
Absolutely. And he is the new president of hockey operations. So, and listen, he's a guy we've been talking about, the former Toronto Maple Leafs general manager, helped get them to the playoffs, is very well regarded in the industry. He's 37 years old. We've been talking about him a lot, Matt, but you got a chance to meet with him on Thursday afternoon after the hiring was announced, along with other reporters. What did you come out of that news conference knowing that maybe you didn't know before about him, given that we've been talking about him for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think what shone through the most was just who he is as a human being. You hear a lot about how he's a smart guy, and obviously you see the work he did in Toronto and how reliant he was on analytics. But he also was up there at this press conference and clearly articulated his vision for the team. He talked glowingly about his time as a locker room attendant for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, who he ultimately became GM of when he was 26. And he also talked about the importance of his family in this decision and how everything kind of fell apart with Toronto and why he ultimately ended up coming to Pittsburgh. So I think it just kind of showed through the personality there, because you hear about someone like him from afar. He was with the Leafs for a long, long time. He gets painted as like an analytics guy. And I don't know if there's still a stereotype of that or not, but I think it just kind of showed that this guy is smart, he's passionate, and he's a human being. We can debate about whether or not it's the right hire hockey-wise. We probably won't know the answer to that for a few years, but he struck me as a pretty smart, savvy, decent guy, and we'll see how things go from here.
What's your understanding of how this all came together and why he was the guy that the Penguins liked ultimately after so many interviews and so much time spent on this search?
Yeah, it's been fascinating how all this played out. I mean, there was, rumblings that this would be a guy that they would go for before they had even fired Ron Hextall and Brian Burke. It all kind of hinged on what happened in Toronto. And the fact that the Leafs won that playoff series and they were trying to bring Dubas back, it just kind of pushed everything further and further along. And, by all accounts, the Pens were, well into their second round of interviews and maybe even nearing a decision when, everything changed there in Toronto and became free. And they immediately pounced on Dubas. And, it sure seems like at that point, they were all in on him. They had to sell him. He talked on Thursday about, they flew him to Boston to meet with Tom Henry, or John Henry, Tom Warner, Dave Beeston from FSG. He came to Pittsburgh, spent some time with Sidney Crosby and Mike Sullivan, and that really seemed to resonate with them and kind of, further strengthen his decision to take this opportunity. And then, the Pens had to kind of wine and dine his wife a little bit. I don't know if they wined and dined him, so to speak, but they were showing him around town, trying to convince them that this was a place they would want to move their young family to. So, that's kind of everything that's taken place here in the last 2 weeks. Dubas said he made the decision earlier this week to take the job, and it sounds like maybe it just took a couple of days to finalize it and get the FSG brass in here for a press conference on Thursday. So that's kind of the blow by blow. But, I think it's fair to say that it looked like they were probably going to hire someone else because they couldn't wait any longer. And then Dubas became free a couple of weeks ago, and here we are today.
Of course, this is Brian Burke's job that he's taking, not Ron Hextall's job. I believe there was talk of
in title,
right? That's kind of what I'm getting at here. Is they're still talking about hiring a general manager, but Brian Burke, no one really knew what he did, right? And everyone looked at Ron Hextall as the decision maker in that GM's role. What do you think that this front office? How do you think it's going to compare and contrast to what Penguins fans got used to under the last regime?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about some of the job titles in many of these cases. Sometimes look what the Flyers are doing. They brought in Keith Jones recently to be their president of hockey ops. For them, he's going to have some say in hockey decisions, of course, but for them, he's going to have his hands in business and a lot of other things. It's almost like an ambassador position, and that's what Brian Burke was kind of like here. Brian Burke has experience as a lawyer. He's run other teams, so he had his hands in a little bit of everything. And obviously, he was there as a confidant for Ron Hextall as well. But make no mistake, Hextall was the one making the decisions. Now, at least in the short term, this is Kyle Dubas' show. He talked about finding a progressive general manager, so that leads me to believe that maybe this is a rising younger GM candidate, kind of like what he was a few years ago, who's going to come in, work under Dubas, but it's going to be Dubas' show. And it'll be interesting what happens down the road. I mean, Dubas is only 37. He hasn't said anything like this, but maybe in a few years or 10 years, he's kind of like, maybe I want to try something else. And within Fenway, that's one appealing thing about Fenway is they have the Red Sox, they have Liverpool. There's a lot of different things that someone can get involved in. So maybe it's a scenario where Dubas is eventually grooms somebody who takes over as the lead hockey decision maker. But for the next few years, it's Dubas' show, and he's just trying to find someone, probably multiple people, who will fit in well as he builds out the infrastructure of the Penguins front office.
Who are some names to look at in that GM search, whatever the role ends up being? But who are some names you think that they might be interested in chasing and adding to that that management group?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about specific names for the GM position, because you do wonder about like the people who are finalists for the job that Dubas ultimately got, whatever you want to say the title is. I'm assuming they're probably all going to be off the table. Maybe that's going to end up being wrong. They did talk to some people from New Jersey's front office, like Megan Duggan, for example. You worry about if someone like her could be in the mix. But one name to definitely watch, I don't know if it's for the GM position, but maybe assistant GM, is Jason Spezza. He's the former player for Ottawa, finished his career in Toronto, had a great relationship with Dubas. Dubas brought him in as an advisor after Spezza retired. And Spezza walked away from the Leafs when they moved on from Dubas. So there might be some contractual stuff they need to sort out, but I definitely think that's one name to watch. I just would be surprised if they put him in as the GM. It's probably looking as more of a assistant GM type position or some other, special advisor type role.
You mentioned analytics, and that's partly what Kyle Dubas is known for. I think some fans, especially the more analytically inclined within the fan base, felt that was somewhere the Penguins were dropping the ball under Ron Hextall, and there was a lot of decisions being made on relationships, maybe eye test type of stuff. What's your sense of where analytics are going to fit into this front office compared to where they were under the last regime?
Yeah, I think they're going to be a big part of it, but I don't think they're going to be the be-all, end-all. That certainly wasn't the case in Toronto. Now, you wonder how much of that was Dubas versus Brendan Shanahan, who was his boss there. But the way Dubas articulated at his press conference is that analytics are something that can help everyone in the organization, from the players to the coaching staff to player development, player health recovery, scouting. I mean, so the way he sees it is analytics are going to have a big part of everything, and they're also going to help to break down some of the silos that could be there within the Penguins organization. He said that's kind of what happened previously in Toronto. He met briefly with the Penguins' very small analytics staff, and that's surely an area that they're going to look to build out, especially when you look at the Fenway Sports Group ties. I mean, look at that Red Sox title, 2 decades ago that was largely built off of analytics. So it's going to be a big part of it. But, Dubas is not just all a numbers cruncher. I mean, this guy is a passionate hockey guy. He played hockey as a kid. He had to stop playing, I believe, at age 14 because of concussions. I mean, this guy cares about the game. He loves the game. His family has ties in the game for a long, long time. So he's not just some nerd like me, who's going to pull up natural stat trick or whatever and be like, oh, this is what we got to do. There is some hockey knowledge there. It's not just numbers with him.
Well, I love stat trick as a term. Got to try to find more ways to use it. But Matt, I also wanted to ask about Mike Sullivan. You tweeted during the news conference that you got the sense that he's safe. I guess my question for you is how safe, because this is going to be his third management regime now, and we know that in hockey the coaches often don't have shelf lives when a management team turns over. So what's your sense of Sullivan's maybe longer term place in the franchise assuming maybe I don't want to make any assumptions. What was your read?
Yeah, so Dubas didn't explicitly say that Sullivan would be back, but that's because he didn't need to. I mean, he spent a big chunk of his press conference talking about the respect he has for Sullivan and how meeting with Sullivan and hearing from Sullivan about his vision for the team and Sullivan's competitive nature, kind of made him want to come to Pittsburgh even more. And he talked about how such a great coach he is. So Sullivan's going to be back. In case you were wondering, I mean, he did help pick Dubas. He did have a big hand in the search. So we kind of assumed that all along. So he's going to be back. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to wonder what happens going forward if the results aren't there on the ice. I mean, Sullivan's shortcomings or would-be shortcomings are well documented just in terms of how inflexible he was with the way the Penguins have played in recent years as they got older. One of the criticisms is him and not trusting young players. Flip side of that is what young players did he have to trust. But still, I mean, there's certain areas where he's going to have to get on the same page as Kyle Dubas. They're going to have common ground. I do think Sullivan is going to have to show more flexibility in some of the things we just talked about. So again, it's results based. If the Penguins, bounce back next year and have a strong regular season, he should be in pretty good standing. But if the team struggles or there's a slow start, just like pretty much every other coach in the league, then we can start to wonder about his future.
There seemed to be a lot of what I'd call happy talk in the news conference about trying to compete and go for it while you still have Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang as the core of this team with starting to look toward the future and what comes after those guys. What's your sense of what that's going to look like in terms of the day-to-day and the big picture decision making? How might philosophies change for the Penguins? And is it a matter of maybe you get to a trade deadline and you're not willing to make trades you used to in the past because you want to keep more of your assets in place? Or what do you think that's going to look like under Kyle Dubas?
Sure. I mean, I think all the candidates who came into the search process probably understood that they would have to pitch Fenway Sports Group on building around Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. I mean, FSG just gave those guys big contracts and no trade clauses, them being Malkin and Letang last summer. And their view of what they want to do has not changed. So I think everyone who interviewed kind of knew that they would have to work around that, and plus there's the no trade clauses. So Dubas said he's looking at a two-pronged plan, trying to give them everything they need to compete now. He talked about the big decision and goal. He wants to meet with Tristan Jarry to get to know him personally. He's going to talk to Mike Sullivan and Andy Chiodo, the goalie coach, about what to do there. He also mentioned big decisions on the blue line, one of them being Ryan Dumoulin. He talked about the bottom six and building out the supporting cast, which, you could argue he was not able to do there in Toronto. So we'll see if he can do it here. But he also talked about the future, kind of building out the infrastructure of an organization and having this be, a team that can not completely become the X generation Penguins once these guys moved on. And obviously that's easier said than done. That's what Hextall and Burke said they wanted to do, and obviously they're not here anymore. So that's a tricky task, but that's what he's going to try to do. He's going to try to win now while not mortgaging everything, but his moves will be telling. And you can look right at the number 14 overall pick in the draft later this month. I mean, I think what they do with that pick, whether they use it or they trade it, will give us a pretty good indication of how Dubas plans to attack the next couple of years here.
What are you most curious about, looking into the summer that the Penguins have ahead of them? I think you mentioned the goaltender situation and the bottom six. I'm sure those would be at the top of the list. But what are you most excited to see what he's got for some of these? I think they're pretty thick problems that a lot of people don't have great answers for when we're analyzing this team.
Yeah, there's a few big ones. I mean, the goaltending thing is a huge one, whether to commit to Tristan Jarry or what their plan will be if they don't. There's a bunch of guys who are locked in. I mean, there's 8 players with some form of no trade protection, including Jeff Carter, who has Sioux Greyhound ties as well. So that's kind of an interesting subplot. Jeff Carter might have actually been a player when Kyle Dubas was a locker room attendant as a teenager in Sault Ste. Marie. So that's a little subplot. And then the supporting cast, could they really have a big quote unquote hockey trade up their sleeve, whether it's a guy like Jeff Petrie or Jake Gensel or even Marcus Pettersson? I mean, guys who don't have full no move clauses or any at all. So I'm kind of fascinated to see just like how bold he is, and then also like how creative is he going to be with the contract stuff. I mean, one of his most one of his signature moves, we should say, in Toronto was, he traded a first round pick to unload Patrick Marleau's contract. So he showed then that he was willing to be aggressive with draft capital to take it, to fix the salary cap. So that's something Ron Hextall didn't want to do, obviously. We'll see if Dubas wants to do it. So I don't know if there's any one thing. It's just a question of, like, as you said it's quite the mess he is willingly stepping into. And I'll just be curious to see what he identifies as the biggest problems and what he's willing to do to get the Penguins out of it. Because the previous regime, they didn't really show much interest in making bold moves. They kind of went with the status quo for the most part.
Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot to talk about, Matt. I think the past couple of months we haven't had you on here because there hasn't been much going on, but that's about to change in the next couple of weeks once we get the Stanley Cup final behind us. I think there's going to be a lot of moves to talk about, so we're excited to have you back, and we're excited for what I hope will be an interesting summer to come. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll talk to you again soon, Matt.
Absolutely, it's going to be a fun few weeks for sure.
All right, and just a reminder to everyone, later today on the North Shore Drive with Chris Carter, we're going to have former Steeler Bryant McFadden talking about all things Steelers. So make sure you're signed up, subscribed for that, and make sure you tune in a little bit later in the afternoon. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all myself next week, and Matt will talk to you soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.